I'm half an hour late. I'm sorry about that. Yog Mahadio asked me to do a program on his 592 interview chat, and I had committed to that, and then I forgot. So when I said I would be live at 8, I'm afraid he started at 7:30, and I had to cut him short early. I hope you can hear me. As you know, we are, it's even difficult to say we're at the end of the process. We are somewhere in the middle of a long, torturous process of getting our elections out of the way, declaring a new government, and hopefully moving forward democratically rather than under a dictatorship. Um, in the latest episode of our own personal soap opera saga, that is Guyana elections, Mr. Lowenfield has been asked to give a report, and he has given the report, and I'm sure that all of Guyana has seen this report or have seen excerpts from it. No one is surprised by the report. The report is exactly what was expected from Mr. Lowenfield, but because he has stayed true to form and because he has done as expected, I think that it is time, it is appropriate now for us to have a discussion on the history of what has taken place in our elections in the last year and what we can expect going forward. Now, I have said before, and I know that it has come in for criticism, but it is my view that the GECOM Secretariat is compromised, and it is compromised from the top. So I'm going to start not discussing the chairman and the six commissioners, because we know how they're appointed. But I want to discuss the Secretariat, the people who, under the Representation of the People Act and the Constitution, are supposed to act on the instructions of those seven commissioners. The seven commissioners comprise GECOM. So let's start at the beginning because I think it's important for us to step back. Right now, we're in the middle of the forest, so we're not seeing trees. And I think we have to step back and see how this thing evolved and where the plans were and how it was intended to take place. I'm satisfied in my mind that APNU did not intend to come out of office. And I say that regretfully because it really had been my hope in 2015 that with the AFC influence and the people in AFC whom I felt I knew, um, whatever happened, the democratic processes would have prevailed and the will of the electorate would have been respected. Um, as we see, that has not taken place. But we are surprised by that now, and I don't think we should have been. Because as I sit back and I look at the sequence of events, I think where we are now is almost inevitable. If you start with James Patterson, when Serge Bali retired, it was necessary to appoint a new chairman of the commission. And the leader of the opposition, Jagdeo, as was required, gave a list of 6 names. He threw in some political figures, but within that list of 6 names were people of substance, people of integrity, people of reputation, professionals who could do the job. And to my enormous alarm, Mr. Granger rejected the whole list. So Mr. Jagdeo gave another list of 6 names, and Mr. Granger rejected the other list of 6 names. And then Mr. Jagdeo gave a third list, 18. 18 names in all. Good, decent, honest people. Tani Husti, Kashir Khan, Anat Arjun, you'll forgive me, full disclosure, Nadia Segar, um, Christopher Ram, Major General Joe Singh, people that nobody can question, people that everyone must admit would have done the job properly. Granger rejected all of them. That was the start of a long-term plan. When Mr. Granger intimated to Mr. Jagdeo that he would accept Claudette Singh, Jagdeo named Claudette Singh and it was accepted. But in the meantime, when he unilaterally appointed James Patterson, a number of important things happened. First of all, contract of law and field confirmed. Second of all, preference of Roxanne Myers over someone who many people said was more qualified. So the docs were being lined up. The secretariat was being created. That same secretariat and those individuals have the discretion of hiring. So staff began to be hired. And then there was a delay after the shock of the no confidence motion. And arrangements were made for the elections. And I want you to think about these arrangements. Plan A was we win the election. APTU told themselves that they'd done a good job, and even though they won by a razor slim majority in 2015 of 4,500 votes, they told themselves, after buoying themselves up and paying to their own large crowds, that they may win a fair election. But they needed a plan B. And with the knowledge that Guyanese vote along ethnic lines, it was quite safe to predict that you only needed to fudge a couple areas. You didn't need to cheat by 50 or 100,000. So a smaller number was accommodated, and they moved forward with that. The plan was simple. A, we win. But if we don't win, and you will remember that Mr. Granger said long before elections, Region 4 is the spot where they will have their fight. Region 4 was the important spot. So the plan was that Region 4 would be the last region to be counted, and a complicit Mingo was subject to instructions. But it couldn't be that simple, you see, because with an election petition, the court has wide powers. And if in an elections petition the court counted those same ballots as we've just recounted them and came to the conclusion that PPP won, the court has the power to say PPP must go into government. So you couldn't allow that to happen. It is better to have a situation where the court says, it is better to have a situation where the court says these elections were not credible. We can't definitively say who won, and therefore we're ordering new elections. So it couldn't just be to allow Mingo to do his thing, because an election petition would uncover that. You also had to compromise some boxes. And there you have a couple boxes in Region 4 where documents don't exist. All of those boxes under the aegis of the same Mingo through his deputy returning officers. So this was the plan. A, we win. But if we don't win, we let Mingo fudge. And we get into power quickly on Mingo's fudge. And when the opposition PPP file an election petition, the court will not be able to say we were wrong because there were enough boxes there that seemed to be compromised because documents missing, that all the court can say is have a new election. And then in that new election, there would be no foreign observers, there would be no cell phones in the premises. It would be a well-run military election with one result. And that was the plan. The plan backfired because of the uproar that was created and because of the pressure from the international community. So the positions were actually reversed. When Mingo gave his declaration, the next day, Lowenfield already had his report ready to give to GECOM, so the GECOM could make the declaration and swear in the president. And the timing was done, so it was a Friday, so he couldn't go to court easily. The anticipation was by weekend, before the weekend was over, the gentleman is sworn in. The honor guard was already dressed waiting at the office of the president to accept this man and swear him in. And that was stymied. And then just the Chief Justice ruled that Mingo had acted wrongly. And the last saving grace that we had that saved us from that predicament was when Prime Minister Maya Motley came and spoke to the leader of the opposition and Mr. Granger and got their agreement that there should be a recount. Now, here again, she surprised them because it is my view that the president agreed to the recount, not intending that that the recount should be done before he's sworn in. He intended to be sworn in and to say, y'all have your recount. But Miss Motley announced it immediately to the public, happily told the public, clever woman that she is, that she's happy to report both sides have agreed that there shall be a recount and the recount will determine the election. So then there's no choice. We then had a situation where APNU had said to their followers, had said to their loyalists, had said to their supporters, we won this election. Basil Williams said fair and credible election. President Granger said fair and credible election. Kathy Hughes, Kemara Dramjatan, the whole lot. Fair and credible elections and we won. And at that stage now, when you had a recount, they said, don't worry, we're going to win by a bigger margin. So as the recount progresses, the problem becomes obvious. APNU have lied to the country. APNU have lied to their followers. APNU have lied to their supporters. So something had to be done about that. And therefore, the decision was taken to question every single box and to make the allegation that in each box there are dead voters and overseas voters. And there is this huge conspiracy by the PPP to corrupt the whole process. Now, this didn't happen. These accusations weren't made by APNU agents in respect to just one box, two boxes, one place of poll, two places of poll. It was made in nearly every single place of poll. Let us say 1,700 places of poll out of the 2,200. And therefore, the story, if you take the time to listen to the story carefully, is that in 1,700 to 2,000 places of poll, in each of those places of poll, the PPP corrupted the APNU agent, the PPP agent, and the GECOM officials in each of them in order to get 7 or maybe 8 false votes. Because that's the numbers you're talking about. So that by the time you reach the 2,000, you've got 16,000 votes that are dead and overseas. So that is the plan that you have been told about. That the PPP thought it was worth their while to corrupt at least 5 agents in each of 2,000 places of poll so as to get 6 or 7 free votes in each of those 2,000 places of poll. Now, if you just do the maths and you pay each of those people $10,000 for that corruption, $50,000 in each place of poll, you're paying a lot of money for a couple of votes. But that is the story that is being sold. And the problem I had is that the APNU supporters who listened to their government, listened to their leaders, when their leaders were, that doesn't help, when their leaders were lying to them, when their leaders said, you have won, when their leaders said, we won these elections, when David Granger went to Lamaha Street to say, we won these elections, those APNU supporters must realize that they've been lied to. And yet, the same APNU supporters are willing to swallow hook, line, and sinker the second, much more unimaginable lie that the PPP corrupted 2,000 places of poll so as to get 6 or 7 free votes in each one. And this takes us now to the complicity of the GECOM Secretariat. The GECOM Secretariat had to be part of this second narrative from the inception. And this is how it was done. As you go to count one ballot box, the GECOM personnel are instructed that they must dutifully and religiously take every objection from the APNU agent in the room. So the APNU agent will ask, of these 170 or 200 or 300 voters. Please tell me if these 50 names voted. And the GECOM officer will look through his list diligently and say these three voted. Now, the GECOM officer doesn't let the opposition or any of the small parties see his list to confirm he's telling the truth. And the observation report will then say that of those three or four or five names, the APNU agent says they were deceased or out of the country. The observation report often will not say there is no evidence presented. Sometimes they'll say it if you quarrel bad enough. No evidence presented. Now, when you want to rebut and you want to say this has nothing to do with a recount, it's impossible to decide from the information in the ballot box the truth of this thing. And we are here to recount ballots, not to decide another screening process. The GECOM official will not write that down. So that by that formula, by the end of the process, each observation sheet that was involved in this recount solemnly in black and white identifies statements and allegations. The word allegations is now famous from APNU agents saying allegation that these people were dead or migrated. And the process then required that those statements of poll, which were generated by complicit, accommodating GECOM officers who took down everything that APNU said and refused to take down any rebuttal that the opposition party said, those documents go to Mr. Lowenfield. And Mr. Lowenfield is to prepare a report. And here we come to the second problem. C.S. Lewis, the author of the Narnia Chronicles, he said that in the 20th century, this traditional concept of evil and wrongdoing, huge wrongs, they don't occur anymore. The most meaningful and lasting ones, they don't occur in the traditional sense of murder and mayhem. Those meaningful, long lasting acts of oppression are done by well dressed, well heeled, well fed people, well shaven, neatly in a boardroom, making decisions behind that bureaucracy. And that's what we see happening with GECOM. These ordinary middle class, well heeled, well dressed people who present so well have taken it on themselves to destroy a democracy. And that is what we have to fight. Because Mr. Lowenfield's job was to do two things. Mr. Lowenfield's job, when the recount was done, was to tabulate the recount so as to say how many votes went for APNU, how many went for PPP, how many went for ANOC, how many went for LJP. Simple maths. And then his second job was to prepare a summary of the observation reports. A summary is not an analysis. A summary doesn't ask for his opinion, doesn't ask him to draw conclusions. A summary is a condensation, it is an abridgment. It makes him give a smaller, shorter version of the larger bundle of documents. That's all. Not an assessment. It is for GECOM to draw conclusions and to have opinions. Lowenfield is subject to GECOM's instructions. He is not there to make any of those decisions. That's GECOM's job. And in total violation of that, in total disregard of that, Mr. Lowenfield took it on himself to issue a report which is virtually identical for each of the 10 regions. In his report, he correctly tabulates the numbers. Now, the first important point is that in his tabulation, he makes no reference and draws no comparison to the original statements of poll and the original counts that were done way back in March. If he had done so honestly, with integrity, he would have informed GECOM that the statement of recount accords exactly within a percentage of a degree with the statement of poll originally done, with the one exception of Region 4. If he had done it with integrity and honestly, he would have said in his report to GECOM that in Region 4, whereas Mingo declared that the APNU won by nearly 70,000 votes. In fact, APNU won by less than 40,000. So that Mingo, by his count, gave APNU an overall victory, which they did not have, by more than 6,000 votes, when in fact APNU had lost by 15,000 votes. None of that appears in Lowenfield's report. But what Lowenfield does in his report is he says that the observation sheets, which were diligently created, remember, with the complicity of GECOM staff listening to APNU, recording their objections, and then refusing to record what the opposition people were saying. Those observation reports talked about dead and deceased persons. And then Lowenfield goes further. He does something that he's not supposed to do, has no business doing. He says that information suggests that there is some substance to these allegations. So he gives a conclusion. He says that information from the chief immigration officer and from the general registry, which deals with births and deaths, seems to give some credence to these allegations. Now, the thing with Mingo is that he is showing a low level of cunning, but it's not really smart. Because anybody who thinks about it will know, and anybody who sat in a courtroom would know, you don't need to be a lawyer, that you can't ask some third party if they think something is true or not, or to give you figures, and you take that piece of paper they hand you and pretend it's gospel. The source of the information has to be examined. You got to ask them where they get it from, who generated that information. You have to bring them in so that they can be questioned by the other side. Mingo doesn't do any of that. Not Mingo. Lowenfield doesn't do any of that. What Lowenfield does is Lowenfield says in his report, it looks as if this thing got some kind of merit because I talked to some people. He takes information and pretends to, because he doesn't say what that information is, he doesn't say where the source is, he doesn't say who the people are. But he pretends to take information from outside of GECOM's records, outside of GECOM's area, from some third party information that he doesn't know the source, he doesn't know the validity, he doesn't know the integrity of that information. And he draws a conclusion based on that the whole elections are incredible. But you know, the sad thing is that even that, he's not brave enough to say. When you're going to lie, at least lie. Because this is Mr. Lowenfield's conclusion. At the end of each of the reports for the 10 regions, he says this: on the basis of the votes counted and the information furnished from the recount. So on the basis of the votes and the information furnished. Doesn't say what information. It cannot be ascertained that the results meet the standard of fair and credible elections. I'm going to say it again because that sentence is a blurring of words that has no meaning whatsoever. It cannot be ascertained, so he can't say that the results meet the standard of fair and credible elections. So he's saying he can't draw a conclusion. But he equally could have said it cannot be ascertained that the results do not meet the standard of fair and credible elections. His final conclusion after trying to color this whole thing is to try by some kind of use of language that is so transparent and obviously misleading that the first reading of it shows the lie. That he's saying he can't draw a conclusion. But instead of simply saying that he can't draw a conclusion, he says he cannot draw the conclusion that it meets the standard of fair and credible elections. So he tries to create the impression it does not meet the standard, but he doesn't go all out to say it. So he's trying to leave a rabbit hole open that he can run through. If anybody challenges him and says, man, where you get your information from? That's the information? That's nonsense. How can you draw this conclusion? He wants to leave the rabbit hole open that he can run through to say, man, I never said that the elections weren't credible. I said I can't draw a conclusion. Now, there's going to be a meeting on this piece of paper that pretends to be a report. GECOM has to meet on it. That meeting will either be tomorrow or the day after. And when we have that meeting, three commissioners from APNU will try to say that these elections are not credible because of Lowenfield's report. And three commissioners from PPP will try to say Lowenfield's report is garbage and GECOM was pronounced and declared a winner based on the recount. So it boils down to the chairperson. It boils down to Miss Justice Claudette Singh. And the whole country is worried because suspicions are so high. Suspicions are so high that no one is to be trusted. And this has been such a farce that it is easy to cast blame on anybody who is involved. But again, I want to ask you to step back and let us see if we can make an assessment of Justice Claudette Singh to see what ought to be done. Justice Singh was brought into this belatedly. She wasn't there for years. She came into a system. She found Mr. Lowenfield and Miss Myers there. She found the commissioners there. They were there before her. She didn't bring them. So she was brought into a structure that she had to work in. And I'm sure, because she's a very experienced lady and she has read legislation ad nauseum, she knows when a system is good from reading it. And I'm sure she read the legislation, the Constitution, the Representation of the People Act, and she realized that this was a good system. And indeed, the system worked perfectly, so that on the day of elections, everything went smoothly. No one could have anticipated what Mingo would do. She certainly couldn't. So I don't blame Mingo's undermining of democracy on her. She easily could have been caught by surprise. Please remember, her job is not to watch Mingo. She didn't go and watch the other 9 regional officers. Her job is to wait for the report from Lowenfield. It's Lowenfield's job to interface with those 10 regional officers. So before the report came to her, there was a brouhaha, it went to court. She has not really had an opportunity to show the country whether she is biased one way or another or whether she is fair. The one thing that she did is as soon as it went to court, she committed to the Chief Justice that she would be doing a recount. And she said in those proceedings that she was heartened by the agreement of Mr. Granger and Mr. Jagdeo, subject to oversight from CARICOM. And she has adhered to that. She's honored it. We've had our recount. The whole country now knows what the count is and who the winner is. But it all goes back to Justice Claudette Singh. It is for her to look at this report from Lowenfield and recognize that Lowenfield has pretended to give an opinion and draw conclusions based on evidence that he does not disclose the source, he does not disclose what the evidence is, he does not show the integrity or the validity of the evidence, he demonstrates that the evidence is beyond the ambit of evidence GECOM can take, and in fact, the evidence must, if it is to be considered, be subject to cross-examination and therefore is for an election petition. Justice Singh is no mental slouch. She is no legal slouch. She knows this. And therefore, what I want to say to you and to Lowenfield is that this boils down to Justice Singh. And this piece of rubbish that has been sent to GECOM is so transparent that no legal mind can seriously give it any credence. And I do not believe that Justice Singh can, if she hopes to be treated herself with any credibility, do anything other than to say to Mr. Lowenfield, you're not here to give opinions and draw conclusions. You are here to give a summary, which is what the order requires you to do. And therefore, it is now for you, having yourself acknowledged that the PPP have won the election by 15,000 votes, to move forward. I know that it's difficult not to be suspicious, and I myself am suspicious. Please don't believe that I am closing my eyes to the obvious that APNU do not intend to come out of office for any reason whatsoever. But I want you to consider what the end result would be of the new approach that APNU is taking. APNU is now saying the elections are so vitiated that they should be annulled altogether. Well, that's another nonsense because there's no constitutional power in GECOM to say we're not declaring a result. GECOM is required to hold the election and declare a result. So one side wins, the other side wins. There's no such thing as no result. But what would the end result be if APNU prevailed on GECOM and there was no result? Who would hold the new elections? Would the same GECOM hold the new elections? The same Lowenfield? The same Mingo? The same Claudette Singh? The same Hetzberger and Roxanne Myers? Would they be entrusted to hire DROs and to train the DROs? Those same DROs that in his report, Lowenfield says did not do their job and were corrupted in each of those 2,000 places of poll. If Lowenfield says that his DROs and his presiding officers were corrupt and were compromised throughout, not just in some localized areas, throughout, do we trust Lowenfield to do it again and Roxanne Myers? Do they hire back the same DROs? Do they hire the same presiding officers? Who pays for it? At what stage do we say we are satisfied that that election was credible? That we ask the same people to do who have just said that they, through their CEO, that they have held an elections which cannot be credible. What kind of mess do we put ourselves in if we do that? And most importantly, who sits in government during another possible 3 month marathon while they mess it up one time, produce another Mingo, mess it up a second time, produce another Lowenfield? It leads to the absurd, it leads to the impossible. And therefore, I have no doubt in my mind that Justice Claudette Singh must know that there must be a result. So that leaves us with one question. Can she give a result for APNU? APNU didn't produce their SOPs. They said they won. The whole country knows they lied. But at the recount, it was exactly the same ballots, the same pieces of paper that were counted over again. On those same pieces of paper that APNU said they won, the whole country saw they lied and that the PPP have more votes. I do not see that it is possible for GECOM to ignore the statement of recount and to give a victory to APNU. I do not see that it is legally possible or even plausible for the chairman to decline to give a result. So for all the drum beating, for all the saber rattling, for all the noise, the increasing noise that we are hearing, I believe that there is only one course of action that can lawfully be taken. And this last-ditch effort by Lowenfield, I think that there is only one recourse. The chairman must treat it as it deserves. It must be ignored. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I have a difficulty when I'm talking, I can't read your comments. But if there are any questions that come up, please ask them now and I will go through them and I'll happily answer your questions as they come up. One person has asked about the impact of the CARICOM report. Now, the three CARICOM officials that were here, they were there day in, day out for the entire duration. They had to oversee 10, 11, 12 places where counting was taking place. There was no weekend, there was no break. They deserve national awards. In the very little interaction I had with them, I found them to be extremely professional. And I rather suspect that their report is going to say that the recount was done fairly, that the result was credible, and that the election should be declared on the recount. What I hope they do, because foreigners don't know how ridiculous Guyanese can get. And they may look at those observation reports and realize that the observation reports aren't worth the paper they're written on and don't give them much attention, give them short shrift. But I hope that they recognize what was being perpetrated by APNU consistently putting their one-sided, unsubstantiated allegations in the observation report. And I hope that they specifically make the point that those observation reports are useless, seek to import information that is not within the ambit of the GECOM process or the recount process and should be disregarded. If they do not, in any event, I am certain they will say that the recount was credible and the result from the recount should be relied on for the vote. Let us wait and see. Are there any more questions? Someone says there shouldn't be a GCOM after this. I'm afraid I don't agree with you. I understand what you're saying. We've been tortured for 3 months. But we haven't been tortured because of the system. And you must have a body that conducts the elections. The system is good. The system is so good, Mingo was caught right away. That, but you cannot legislate against individual fraud by individuals, by personalities. But what you have to do is ensure that the system is so good that when an individual perpetrates a fraud, he's caught. And that's what happened. Mingo was immediately recognized. What he was doing was immediately seen, and it was stopped. What we have to do is replace the people who we see have committed fraud. We have to prosecute them, and we have to let our leaders see that they do not get away with murder. They're not above the law, that they must be accountable. Because if we can demonstrate that, if our judicial system, our structure can demonstrate that, the next go round, people will be much more reluctant to commit fraud. Our problem is no one has ever gone to jail for it. I see Sean Bob asked my position on criminal charges for those involved. And as I said, I think criminal charges should be pressed. There needs to be accountability so that in the future, people look back and see that they're not going to get away with this scot free. They'll be more cautious in trying to perpetuate a fraud. Someone asked if a court action can be filed to quash Lowenfield's report. I don't think that it would be prudent. You see, Lowenfield doesn't have decision-making power. He didn't declare the election. He gave an opinion. And an opinion doesn't bind anyone. So to go to court about an opinion is neither here nor there. The court would say no one's stuck with that. No one's bound by it. Someone says Mr. Harmon said the chairman must act on the advice of the CEO. I didn't hear Mr. Harmon say that, but no, it doesn't work like that. The CEO is subject to the instruction of GCOM, including the chair, not the other way around. Okay. Well, I'd like to say thank you for listening. We will see what the chair says, how she deals with the report from Mr. Lowenfield, and I will come on again in a few days so that we can have a discussion on that. Thank you very much for listening and for your attention. Um, I hope that at some point we can reward the three CARICOM people. We need to give them some kind of award, some kind of recognition. And I hope that at the end of the day, we have a democratic system in place so that we can move forward. Thank you all. Good night.